On a crisp June morning, Canada made a stunning announcement. American access to Alaska would be sharply restricted. The land bridge connecting the continental US to Alaska was suddenly constricted, sending shockwaves across North America. This wasn't a minor spat. It was a bold assertion of Canadian sovereignty. The government cited national security, allowing only essential travel. For thousands of Americans, the once familiar drive up the Alaska Highway became a journey into uncertainty. The move was a direct response to months of escalating tensions and economic warfare. President Trump's aggressive rhetoric had pushed relations to the brink, but few expected this. The world's longest undefended border now felt like a fracture line. Canada's action was calculated and precise, targeting the vital link to resource-rich Alaska. Chaos erupted, truckers faced hours-long inspections, families' plans were upended, and tourists were turned away. The Canadian Border Services Agency enforced the new rules with resolve. The message was unmistakable. Canada was no longer a passive neighbor. This was more than a travel restriction. It was a statement of independence. Years of absorbing economic pressure and political provocation had reached a breaking point. The closure of the Alaskan corridor was a strategic assertion of control. Canada reminded Washington that the path to Alaska runs through foreign land. The move demonstrated Canada's geographic leverage. If pushed, Canada could sever a critical American link. The era of quiet cooperation was over. A new, uncertain chapter had begun. The year 2025 was a pressure cooker for US-Canada relations. President Trump's second-term America First agenda imposed steep tariffs, 25% on most Canadian goods, 10% on oil and gas. These weren't tweaks, they were economic bombs threatening to unravel decades of integration. Canada hit back with its own tariffs, sparking a trade war that sent prices soaring on both sides. Border communities, reliant on cross-border trade, felt the pain first. American goods became unaffordable in Canada. Canadian materials for US industries skyrocketed in price. The rhetoric from Washington grew more provocative, with Trump openly musing about Canada as the 51st state. What once sounded like bluster now felt like a real threat to Canadian sovereignty. Outrage swept Ottawa and the nation. This wasn't partnership. It was a prelude to a hostile takeover. Nationalist sentiment surged, and Canada was backed into a corner. Restricting access to Alaska became a powerful symbol of resistance. It was a clear message. Canada would not be bullied. The cost of American aggression would be high. The friendly neighborhood was gone. The border had become a front line. The conflict was no longer abstract. It was real of vulnerability and isolation. Tariffs weren't just numbers, they hit wallets hard. In border towns like Hyder and Stewart, the impact was immediate. Residents who crossed daily for work or groceries saw prices for basics like lumber and bread soar. Alaska's construction industry, reliant on Canadian materials, ground to a halt as costs skyrocketed. Job losses rippled through both sides, Alaskan contractors and Canadian mill workers alike. The energy sector suffered as fuel prices rose, making daily life and transport even harder. New border rules created delays for truckers, spoiling perishable goods and holding up medical supplies. The once efficient border became a bottleneck. For those living along it, the political conflict was a daily struggle, not a distant debate. The free-flowing border was now a source of hardship. Communities that once thrived together now faced division and uncertainty. The human cost was mounting. Survival in the north had never felt so precarious. Meet the Petersons of Haines, Alaska, 3 generations living near the BC border. It was at stake. Amid the crisis, an extraordinary move came from Juneau, not Washington or Ottawa. The Alaska legislature passed a resolution affirming support for Canadian independence and sovereignty. It was a direct rebuke of President Trump's annexation talk. The resolution highlighted Alaska's unique relationship with its Canadian neighbors, built on mutual respect and shared interests. Lawmakers recognized that Alaska's prosperity depended on a strong, sovereign Canada. They opposed the federal tariffs, seeing them as more damaging to Alaskans than to Canadians. The resolution was pragmatic, rooted in economic reality. Canadians hailed it as a sign that friendship wasn't dead. For Alaskans, it was a moment of pride and hope. Their leaders acted as diplomats seeking to preserve vital cross-border ties. Alaska made it clear, Canada was a partner, not a target. The gesture offered a glimmer of reason amid the chaos. It showed that local voices could still shape the future. As politicians clashed, ordinary citizens took action. A quiet movement of citizen diplomacy emerged along the border. Canadians continued visiting Alaska, not as tourists, but as acts of solidarity. Boycotts instead of boycotts. Community groups held joint meetings, and arts councils organized cross-border exchanges. The Buckwheat Ski Classic became a symbol of grassroots unity. Canadian skiers were welcomed as ambassadors of goodwill. These efforts kept communication open when governments shut it down. Personal relationships became the true foundation of the US-Canada bond. While headlines screamed conflict, these quiet acts spoke of resilience and shared identity. On the northern frontier, neighborly ties were essential for survival. The people refused to let politics define their future. Canada's restriction on Alaska access echoed a past crisis. During the 2020 pandemic, Canada had already closed the Alaska loophole for non-essential travel. Americans exploited the exemption, angering Canadians and prompting a crackdown. Strict measures were introduced: direct routes, time limits, and special tags for travelers. The message was clear: no more loopholes. In 2025, the motivation shifted from public health to sovereignty and economic self-defense. The infrastructure of control from the pandemic was repurposed for political conflict. Canada drew on this experience, knowing it could enforce strict border measures. Public support was strong. Patience for American rule-breaking was gone. The precedent had been set in 2020. Now the stakes were higher and the restrictions more consequential. Canada was prepared and resolute. The border was no longer just a line, it was a statement of national will. Canada's bold move has redrawn North America's map. The world's longest undefended border now marks a deep divide. This isn't a temporary freeze, it's a fundamental shift in relations. Ottawa has shown it holds real leverage and will use it. Alaska is caught between a confrontational federal government and a vital foreign neighbor. The state may seek stronger direct ties with Canada, bypassing Washington. The US-Canada relationship faces an uncertain path. Trust has been eroded. Rebuilding it won't be easy. Canada may diversify its alliances, forever altering the continent's dynamic. The restriction on Alaska is a watershed moment, a declaration of sovereignty and a demand for respect. The future depends on whether both nations can learn from this crisis, or if new walls will rise along the northern frontier.